This is the Islamic book. There are three, by the way, in Islam, sources for all Islamic religion. The Quran is number one. The Hadith is number two. And the Surah is number three. The Hadith was the teachings of Muhammad. Okay, this is what he was. This book is what he was claimed he was given, dictated to him in the cave. Remember, so the Hadith was his teachings, and then the Surah is basically a narrative of how he lived his life, and they consider those three to be authoritative. Okay, you won't find it in the Quran, but in the Surah, for example, if you read it, you will discover that his last wife was named Aisha. He married her when she was 6, and he consummated the marriage when she was 9. It's in that book. I'm not making that up. So you don't want to read that in an Islamic country, howsoever, out loud. They'd probably kill you if you did. But we'll talk about the Quran when we get to that. What it says and doesn't say. Separate fact from fiction about Islam. Okay. One of the most important things we'll do is we're going to look at Sharia law when we get to that. Understand what Sharia is, why it's important to Muslims. Okay, you'll get more. You'll get more about that in your folder. In fact, I even have a sheet about Sharia on the Islam part. But let me begin with an introduction to the cults proper, so you understand the cults. Remember that cults don't just happen. There is usually some kind of religious fervor or movement, something taking place, and as a result of that, you have these groups that pop up. And they always pop up around a charismatic individual. Okay? The person charismatic may be a charismatic personality. They draw people to them. It may be they have the gift of teaching or oration, speaking, and so they are able to influence people. Now, stop there and realize for a moment, because all of us are sitting here thinking, well, but they couldn't influence me. But the people they influenced were educated, knowledgeable people who probably said the same thing. The problem is, if we're not prepared for it and don't understand how they work, it's easier for them to get into our minds. And they can even come across as very mainstream. They can be deceptive. Got to be careful. John, in his epistle, said to us, remember, test the spirits. Check it out. You got to know. So, you have a charismatic leader. This person believes, and many of them sincerely believe this, by the way. Not all of them are charlatans. Some of them really seriously believe this. That God has given them the ultimate truth because the church has lost it and refuses to accept it from God. And God's laid it on them, and it's their responsibility then to impart it to others. And so they'll form a group around them. Where do these people come from? Almost every single case, they came out of the church. They were a part of a church somewhere, in some fashion, before they came out. Okay? So, as we get to these cults, we're going to see the charismatic people around whom they formed. First movement of the cults occurs in the 1800s during the Second Great Awakening, great religious fervor, and you have the rise of some cultic movements there, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, others. Then there were more after revivalism. We had some movements that occurred there. And then in the 20th century, we had a number of cultic movements that arose. The most famous of those, well, also in 1800 revivalism, I forgot to say, Mary Baker Eddy, Church of Christian Science. Y'all probably have heard of Christian Science. Mary Baker Eddy, that's when that one comes to rise. 20th century, you get the rise of movements like Scientology. L. Ron Hubbard, who was a science fiction writer, we're going to talk about him. And I did not get notes on all of them. I will if you want to study more. But for example, Herbert W. Armstrong, the Worldwide Church of God. Some of you probably remember his radio broadcast, The World Tomorrow. My father used to listen to that. We'll talk about how that movement came to be. He believed in what's called Anglo-Israelism. He thought that the descendants of the Israelites were not the ones that were left in Jerusalem, but migrated to Europe and came to America. So that we were the true descendants. It's called Anglo-Israelism. It's false teaching. Okay, but That's another movement that came to rise, and there are a number of others we'll talk about if you want to with the cults. And we're going to look at the charismatic leaders. What they all have in common, okay, is that the leader's teachings may come across as looking like orthodoxy when it's not. There are subtle differences and changes early on. They're not going to get you there to start with. Okay? They're going to give you enough to make you think this thing is orthodox. But once they get you hooked, then they start moving you away from orthodoxy. You're going to get the real stuff after they know they've got you hooked. Okay? They got a commitment out of you. This is why cult leaders, particularly 20th century cults, had a tendency to isolate people, get them away from their family, away from the church, so they could brainwash them. And brainwashing techniques can be done many, many ways. Okay? Some people are just more susceptible to brainwashing than others. And we see that going on right now with the mob think and the way people are getting influenced, mob mentality, and the things we see happening around us. Another thing they have in common is they generally deny the deity of Christ. Now, they may not come right out and say he wasn't God. Okay? May not say that in their early teachings. But as you get into their teachings, you will discover at some point they have a way of diminishing the deity, sometimes in large steps and sometimes in very small ways. But if you pick up on it, you realize what they're doing, where they're headed. Classic example of one way of doing that. The Jehovah's Witness translation of the Bible. Let's turn to the Gospel of John. Most powerful gospel in the Bible. John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was, what's the Bible say? God. But this one says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. Little g, a. Now I will tell you, I have talked to a number of Greek scholars, and all of them will tell you there is no article in the Greek. That a is not there in the Greek. That means they intentionally added that a. Another thing they do is you will discover that Jesus was not crucified on a cross, he was crucified on a stake. Why that's so important to them, we're going to talk about. But anyway, that's one way of diminishing the deity of Jesus. Another way is when they're trying to talk to you about their beliefs, they'll distract you from that subject. That's okay, let's talk about this thing. And many of these people have been programmed to only talk about certain things. They're not allowed to discuss certain topics. For example, Jehovah's Witnesses are not allowed to talk about the Trinity. They don't believe it. Okay? They won't talk about it. So if you ask them about it, they'll change the subject. They can't talk about it. So, or they may ask you what you know and try to refute it, but they won't talk about it. So they're not a deity of Christ. Now, the reason for that is that if they have the truth, the church has lost the truth, okay? Then if Jesus is the Son of God authoritatively, then it creates problems for their teaching as being authoritative. Their teaching cannot be authority and Jesus' teaching be authority, and they be opposite of each other. See what I'm saying? Distinctly opposite. And when you get into their teachings, you'll find that some of the things they teach just are mind-boggling. For example, some of the cults teach who you marry, when you marry, how many children you can have. Sin Young Moon, for example, Unification Church, he would do weddings for groups of people all at one time, but they had to wait. Couldn't get married before. And so many of them have this kind of control over people. Okay? Large and small, these cults occur. Okay? And some churches are cultic in that sense, that a pastor has that much influence over people's lives. That's a dangerous thing. Dangerous thing. Occurs in many ways. When I was in seminary and working as a student assistant pastor in a church in North Durham, one of my church members there worked for a company that goes in when they're building restaurants and puts in all the restaurant equipment. They go in and install it, so they can run a restaurant. Well, they were opening a new restaurant in North Durham on Guest Road. If you know anything about Durham, Guest Road's on the north side of Route 85, called the Acorn Restaurant. At that time, it's what's called the Acorn Restaurant. It's something else now. They were in there working, putting in the equipment, and the owner came in to see how things were going and to speak to the contractor. And my church member, whose name was Neil said we were putting in the equipment, and he said this guy walked in and he's looking around, just looking around at everything. And the owner turns to him and says, can I help you, sir? He said, I'm curious, what kind of restaurant is this going to be? He said, family restaurant. He said, okay. He said, you going to sell alcoholic beverages? He said, no, it's going to be a family restaurant, no alcohol. He said, how are your waitresses going to dress? He said, well, they're going to wear pants. Why are they going to wear pants? Well, they're going to be bussing tables, and I just thought it would look better if they had on pants rather than short skirts, bussing tables. He said, sounds good. He said, I'll let my people come eat with you. He was the pastor of a large independent church in North Durham. I'll let my people. You hear that? Okay. It comes in all forms, but this is how they work. Control. They see all other churches as apostate, by the way. That is, they are in error because they've fallen away from God and therefore have lost the truth. And they will often target churches. For example, the pastor may go off in a tangent and talk about the heresy of the Presbyterians or the Pentecostal holiness or whatever. He'll pick one. But get them all covered. Because they want to cast doubt that anybody would think that any of those churches could be legitimate or relevant. Now, you need to know how they work on people. Cults have different approaches. One approach is they have a family member or close friend who will needle you and say, you really should go with me. You should experience this. It'll change your life. It's a good thing. You know, just come one time with me. And they get you in, and 4 or 5 people surround you, and they bombard you. Pretty intimidating. That's how they do it sometimes. Sometimes they just give you some things to read and say, read this and we'll talk about it. Okay? That's a more subtle approach. Sometimes they send a team to talk to you at home and the comfortableness of your own environment, but they'll come repeatedly. And if they think they're getting a breakthrough, they think they're getting through to you, it gets more intense. Okay? So they have different methods of working. A lot of cults, particularly back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, when cults were on the rise again, they were hitting college campuses. They were looking for young people who were disenchanted with the church, many of whom were vulnerable for a variety of reasons, emotional issues, depression, any number of things. They could pick them out. They could pick them out, and they would often recruit them. And we know that. For one classic example of a late 20th century cult that did that very well was Jim Jones, the People's Temple. A lot of his followers came from University of Southern California, UCLA, Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, and others. In fact, one of his wives, he had several. One of his wives, it's either USC or UCLA in Stanford. She had several degrees. Brilliant woman. Her father was a United States congressman, I believe, or senator, one of the other congressmen. Flew down to check on her when Jim Jones moved them to Guyana, to Jonestown, and he was killed. When he got ready to leave, Jones became a paranoid schizophrenic, thought he was going to go get the National Guard to come down here, the Army, so he had him killed at the airport. So that actually happened. That's just before he ordered them all to drink the Kool-Aid. All right. That's another problem. Not all cult leaders become paranoid schizophrenics, but a lot of them do. Jones did, of course. So did David Koresh down there at Camp Davidian in Waco. They will teach, these cult leaders will teach their followers at some point they are the Messiah. Okay? That they're the Messiah. God needed a new Messiah. That's why he gave me the truth and I'm the Messiah. Koresh taught that to all of his followers, that he was in fact Jesus Christ. Okay? And he taught some other strange things that you sit there and wonder how could people believe it, but like I said, when they get into your mind. Okay? One of the things he taught the females in that group was if they wanted to be saved, they had to sleep with him because he had holy seed and it would save them. And many of them believe that. True. Not making that up. Even the young girls. So, if you read the story behind that, it's very disturbing. Very disturbing.
I've got a friend who's got a cousin, first cousin that's in with the Moonies.
Mm-hmm.
And,
that's Sin Young Moon. That's Unification Church.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. One of the things the cults will do is they demand obedience. And they demand that obedience to be shown in a number of ways. One way, of course, is it may be that they're required to go house to house, door to door visiting for so many months or even years. Mormons require 2 years, to do that. And they have to raise their money and pay themselves for themselves. So, and for a long time it was only the men. Now the women do it as well. They've gotten more open-minded about that. Others require acts of obedience that you swear allegiance, oaths, what we used to call blood oaths. That doesn't mean that you bleed. It simply means that you promise that you would, you'd be willing to have your throat cut or whatever if you did. But some of them require oaths. Some of them require, as we just said with David Koresh, other strange acts of obedience. You submit yourself willingly. Some of them require you turn over everything you got to them. You don't own anything anymore because they're setting you free from temptation. But they're living an opulent life. They're taking all your stuff, all your money. Or you go out and sell things. Remember the Hare Krishnas at all the airports selling poppies and carnations and all those things. So they have to go out and do that and raise money. That's another way of showing obedience. And of course, you study the teachings. You are willing to separate from your home, your family. That's also an act of obedience. Isolation, you have no contact with them. You're willing to spend time there. They may put you through periods of deprivation. That is, you fast. You go without water or food for 3 or 4 days. As an act of obedience, or you walk a long distance, act of obedience, or you all kinds of different rituals that they put people through. If you study them, you'll see. And you wonder, do they really care about the health of people? Some of the things that they actually do. So those are some of the things they do. And they will not allow you in a cult to do your own reading in Scripture. They teach you what they want you to know. Okay? Because if you start reading on your own, you might get a revelation here. You might, they're going to contradict the Scripture anyway. So they're going to teach you what they want you to know. They claim a special closeness to God. That God speaks directly to them. God gives them revelation. Some of them, through mind control, appear to do miracles. And some of those miracles are actually shams. For example, Jim Jones used to do healing things, and he would have the person on the altar, and he would reach down and pull a tumor out of them. Well, it was a piece of liver in a bucket he had hidden under the altar. Bloody liver. And he'd pull it out. So they have all kinds of ways of doing these things. Okay? So, the cult leaders learn quickly how to, we're talking about cults, Lisa, and we were just saying that cults are started by charismatic individuals. The charisma may be a personality that draws people to them, or it may be their ability to teach, or their ability to analyze people and brainwash them. But they have a charisma about them, and they convince them that the church is apostate. They alone have the truth. They're the new Messiah. They get into people's heads. They require obedience in many forms. We just talked about some of those ways that they require obedience. You turn over everything you own to them. You go out and raise money, or you go through rituals, esoteric rituals, to prove your obedience to them, and so forth. Many different things. In some cases, they are particular, as I've said, sexual practices or sexual favors, like Koresh we just talked about. He convinced the women in his cult that in order to be saved, they had to sleep with him because his was holy seed, because he was the Messiah. And many of them believed it. So, strange things. But this is the way. Now, not all cult leaders did that. Okay, some of them did other things, but that was one thing he did. But when you're dealing with a cult, there is, and you got a person like that, there's no accountability. Okay, they're in control. They're doing what they want to do, unless they get into trouble. And we'll talk about how some of them got into trouble and what happened to them. You find that very interesting as we look at them. For example, of course, as you know, Jim Jones committed suicide at Guyana, Jonestown. But Joseph Smith who was the founder of the Mormons. Now, that movement started back in the early part of the 1800s. What happened was, in the Great Awakening, Second Great Awakening, you had all of these revivals taking place, and all the preaching was hellfire and brimstone. There's one place in New York near Niagara Falls that was they said they had so many revivals held there because it was a popular gathering place that the locals referred to it as the burn over district. You know, hellfire, burn over district. Well, apparently Smith went to one of those revivals. He probably was required to go, taken by his family, and he came home and had nightmares, couldn't sleep, because the notion of hell scared him so bad. And so he went off in search of truth. And while he was out there by himself, he was visited by an angel whose name was Moroni. And Moroni dictated to him, gave to him 2 golden tablets. And on those tablets, on those tablets were writings that Moroni wanted him to have. Moroni told him that the church had lost the truth. Remember, I told you that. And that God was revealing the truth to him alone. And he wrote those things down. Nobody ever saw the golden tablets, by the way. The 2 witnesses that everybody points to who claimed they saw the golden tablets, they never said that. All they said was, he told us he had the golden tablets. They attested that he told them that. Not that they ever seen it. And he wrote that down, and it became the Book of Mormon, which they later added the subtitle, Another Testament of Jesus Christ. See how subtle that is? Interesting, isn't it?
How old was he, do you know, at that point?
At that time, 20s. Yeah, he was a young man. He quickly ran into trouble with his cult in New York, in Palmyra, New York, for a variety of reasons. And so they moved, they migrated, and they went to St. Louis, to Missouri. And they got in trouble there for a variety of reasons. So they went north across the river there into Illinois. If you know, Missouri and Illinois are right there together. He crossed over into a small town there called Nauvoo, Illinois. Okay? And that's where he, and what he did is he added things as he went along. He added teachings. He made up doctrines as he went along. And that's where he adopted the doctrine of polygamy. Okay? Which taught that women had to be married to get into heaven. And since there were more women than there were men, guess what? Men had to have more than one wife. Get them in heaven. I want you to go to heaven. So, and he had several wives. Well, that blowed up, and he got arrested for a variety of things that he was doing, and put in jail. And a group of people, in anger over some of the things he was doing, they went and pulled him out of the jail cell and lynched him in Nauvoo. He had a young lieutenant, very bright man named Brigham Young, and Brigham Young led the remnant followers to Salt Lake City, Utah, where they settled. And by 1880, it became obvious that the federal government was going to outlaw polygamy, so the church outlawed it ahead of the government. So just ahead, but ahead. In the Mormon, we'll talk more about it, but in the Mormon movement, the chief elder is like the Pope. He has absolute authority, and one elder can correct the previous one. He can change something he taught, just like the Pope can. Okay? So you know where Joseph Smith got the idea for the chief elder, right? Okay. And but the thing that they did right, okay, not everything the Mormons did was wrong. The thing that they did right was to focus on the family and the disciplined life. You'll find that most Mormons, devout Mormons, do not drink alcoholic beverages at all. They don't smoke. They live a very disciplined lifestyle. And by the way, they take care of each other. You will not find a Mormon, devout Mormon, and you may have left the Mormon church, but you won't find a devout Mormon on welfare. They won't do it. They take care of themselves. Also, all Mormons used to, and I think they still do, devout Mormons, they keep like 2 years' worth of food in their homes. They're always prepared for the final coming, time of deprivation and need. So they do some good things. Now, here's the thing about the Mormon church is, the last 10 years, they have begun a movement, a transition toward being more mainstream. They're giving up some of the teachings that were heresy, out of bounds. Most notably, among the Mormon teachings is that there are all these gods up there that need bodies to inhabit. And so we need to marry and have lots of children so they'll have bodies. Okay? And once the God inhabits you, inhabits your child, they're going to be a god somewhere. So that's why they were referred to as the God makers by some people. They've moved away from that. Celestial marriage is what it was called. They've moved away from all those kind of things, trying to move more and more mainstream. By the way, one of the most beautiful, fantastic choirs you'll ever hear is the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. Love to hear them sing. And they do all the classic hymns. It wasn't until, I think it was 2010 or 2011, I've got the CD, I can look it up, that they invited for the first time ever a non-Mormon to preach in the Mormon Tabernacle. This is an indication of their movement. See? Dr. Ravi Zacharias, who's a Christian evangelist, they invited him to come and speak. And he indicated to them, I will come under two conditions. One, that I can bring some music along with the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. And they said, fine. He said, and number two, that I get to preach the gospel unfettered. In other words, you can't tell me what I can preach. They said, that's what we want. We want you to preach. And when he finished his sermon, and that sermon is a traditional, revival, evangelical, invitational sermon. When he finished it, they gave him a standing ovation. So it's an indication, and he's been invited back. He's been back there to teach and do other things, which tells us there's some movement happening. That doesn't always happen, but it's beginning to occur. I don't think you're going to see a whole-scale movement that will become mainstream, but I think it is they want to come out of the fringe and being seen as a cult and be seen as more of a mainstream church. They still do not have clergy like we define clergy. They have an elder, they have leaders, and they have Mormon meeting houses, various communities. They have to have like the Jews did when they built synagogues. You had to have 12 families to build a synagogue. They have to have 12 families to build a Mormon church. So they followed that. There was a group that broke off from them in Missouri, by the way, who believe they're the true Mormons. They also believe they're the true Jews, just like we were talking about Herbert W. Armstrong a while ago. So a lot of people believe that Anglo-Israelism, which is crazy. The basic ideas of the Mormons, if we talk about them for just a moment, is that they have been given the priesthood of Aaron and Melchizedek. The Aaronic priesthood, was established through Aaron. Melchizedek was a good, righteous, and powerful king who lived at Salem in the Old Testament. Abraham offered him a sacrifice. By the way, you know where that was? That Salem where he offered that sacrifice? Jerusalem. Salem. Get it? Same place. Okay. And they believe these were eternal. They believe that these are the basis for all authority and salvation. And that the priesthoods manifest in church presidents, apostles, high priests, 70s, and elders. Okay. 1820 is when he went in the woods and had that revelation from Moroni. 1823, I'm sorry. That he had that revelation. So he was searching from 1820 to 1823. That the name became the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. All right. They also believe that God was first a man. Brigham Young taught that he was Adam, who was resurrected and glorified. They believe, as I said, there are many gods in heaven and that they're polygamists. So that's why they practice polygamy. There were some fringe groups that broke off the main Mormon church after they got to Salt Lake, and they outlawed polygamy so they could practice polygamy. Still goes on out there today. Sister Wives, that TV show was about that. Goes on out there today. All right? And in following their historical understanding, by the way, they consider a woman at 12. So they can get married at 12. I'm talking about among the fringe group. Now, not the main Mormons, no, but the fringe groups that practice polygamy consider that. That's what got that guy in trouble out there in Texas, because he had 9 wives and 2 of them were 12 years old.
How many Mormon groups are there? When we went to Salt Lake City, and we had some of the locals talk to us about it.
Yeah. There are at least 6 fringe groups besides the main Mormon group. Because there's a group in Illinois, there's a group and one in Illinois and one in Missouri may have merged, I don't know, because they both believe the same thing. There's fringe groups in Texas and Utah and Arizona. There's a group in New York, was a fringe group. So probably 4 or 5, 6 of them all together, but the main group is Salt Lake City. That's the main church. These fringe groups, they don't look at Salt Lake City, they don't recognize their authority. Some of them are dying out or have died out, because if you don't draw people in, eventually, for a while they were able to draw people in, but I don't think they are anymore. I'd have to look that up, do a little more research on it. And it may be there's only like 2 or 3 of those groups left anymore. We could see. They believe that the Holy Spirit is a substance, a fluid, a person, and a non-material being. Curiously, they also believe that non-material beings cannot exist. So that's a contradiction. But you see, cults get by with contradiction because they change things as they go along. So if you point it out, they say, well, what except for the Holy Spirit? Okay. Or something like that. Because we believe it's part of the Trinity. And eternal life in Mormon teaching is to learn to be God's. They believe that God has a body, that He's not a spirit being, but is a form that is visible. Well, we believe that God was in the flesh, was Jesus. And we believe that, and we have descriptive human words for God. We call those anthropomorphisms. God's face, God's anger, God's hands, so forth. So they believe that God came down in His human body and had sexual relations with Mary. This is how Jesus was conceived. They don't believe in the virgin birth. Okay. They believe that salvation involves faith in Christ, baptism by immersion, obedience to the teachings of the Mormon Church, good works, and the keeping the commandments of God, which will cleanse away the stain of sin. They do not believe that Christ's blood will atone for all sin. The sinner's blood may have to be spilled. For them it is grace plus obedience, good works equals salvation. They also believe in universal salvation. All will be saved. So his understanding of heaven was 4 tiers. Okay? The bottom tier was for the bad people. Still heaven, but they're at the bottom. The second tier was for good people who were not Mormon. Christians that were not Mormons. They get the second tier. Third tier is Mormons who were not devout Mormons. And the fourth tier was devout Mormons. He did away with hell. You get it? Because it scared him so bad. He did away with it. Troubled him. And so there you are. The telestial for heathen people who reject the gospel, terrestrial for Christians who do not accept Mormon message, and for unfaithful Mormons, and celestial. 3 levels, not 4. I'm sorry. 3 levels of heaven. Yeah, it was 4, and they changed that. One of the elders went back and changed it. No, it was only 3. So originally they had 4.
Well, at least they included other people.
That's right. They did.
Some of them,
They also believe in proxy baptism. That is, you can baptize somebody on behalf of the dead. Because you got to be baptized to get into heaven. They do not believe in divorce. Marriage for them is very, very important. Remember, we're talking about celestial marriage. It's very, very important. So divorce is an anathema. It's not done generally. However, the Mormons have had to deal with the fact that they had some celebrities among the Mormons who didn't follow that teaching. And rather than have a public spectacle of not disenfranchising, excommunicating them from the Mormon Church, they just let it slide. The most famous of them was a lady named Marie Osmond. Remember, she divorced. And it was a very public divorce. So, yeah, the Osmonds were, and they gave a lot of money to the Mormon Church. By the way, you may not know this, Mormon Church owns Prudential. Got a piece of the rock? They own that. And they also own Marriott hotels. It's a wealthy church, by the way. It's a wealthy church. So, not knocking them, I'm just explaining. Nothing I say here is meant to knock, but to explain, help you understand, okay? So, a lot of interesting things about this group when you start getting into it and studying more about it. Remember I said, if you want to read more, you can go online, you can read the book from Walter Martin and know more about that. One thing about it is it's hard for some people to accept this as a cult because of their public image. Like I said, it's so good. I taught this study in one church I served, and one of my members who had been in the Navy in World War II and had stayed with a Mormon family in California for a short time was very upset with me. And I explained to him, I'm not criticizing the fact that these are devout people and loving people and a good family life. What I'm telling you is from a historical perspective, from a philosophical perspective, they are a cult. And when I shared with him some of the teachings, he found it hard to believe because he never heard that while he stayed in their home. And they wouldn't do that. You'll see the Mormons on the bicycles and so forth, and they'll talk to you, and they're very friendly and kind and have some interesting conversations. I've had some with them. So no issue there. It was made up, by the way, a big deal was made out of the fact that Romney, when he was running for office, was a Mormon. Y'all remember that? And my response was, so what? That might make him a more moral person. He might have more integrity. Being a Mormon, that doesn't bother me that he's a Mormon. I mean, shoot, they had a hard time with Jimmy Carter. He was a Baptist. You know?
And my daddy was very upset when Kennedy was elected.
Oh, he was Roman Catholic. Well, it's interesting because when Kennedy ran, some of the writers who were opposed to Kennedy, news writers, wondered if he would take his orders from the Vatican because he was Roman Catholic, which he would not do, by the way. But they wondered that. Mm-hmm. When Reagan ran, remember President Reagan was running, some of the writers asked, will he take his orders from the Vatican in Lynchburg? Remember Jerry Falwell and the silent majority? Which wasn't the case. Reagan didn't do that either. But no, John Kennedy did not do that at all. So, but we always want to tie those things together. Nixon was a Quaker, for example. All of them come from different traditions. George Bush Sr. and George Bush Jr. were Episcopalian. That's not really a major issue. But we drag these things up because even there's something that they could hold over the man's head. And I guarantee you most of those writers who were saying that about Romney had no idea what the Mormons believe and teach. So, but there is a brief synopsis of the Mormons. Let me stop there. Questions about cults in general or the Mormons in particular?
Well, we went to Raleigh last night and picked up a neighbor's daughter.
Yeah.
And while we were there was 3 or 4 different ones. They were dressed in burgundy, long.
Yeah.
I couldn't quite figure out what if it was Moonies or maybe monks. I don't know. Could have
been Moonies. There's a number of groups very similar to the Moonies, the Unification Church, that do that. And that's another thing. Some of the cults require a particular kind of dress.
Yeah.
They do that. And some of that they borrow from traditions where that's obvious. Orthodox Jews dress a certain way, the Amish dress a certain way, Mennonites dress a certain way. There's nothing wrong with that, but they borrow those kind of ideas.
Yeah. This was almost, like I said, the long was, strap or whatever. Cross.
Yeah. I don't know.
Women then both
it's possible.
Dressed in it.
Could be unification. They do that. There's a couple of other groups. There's a cult out of Boston. I forget the name of it, and slips my mind right this second. But I think some of their people wear particular kinds of costumes. So, but yeah, that a lot of times is a giveaway.
And it was there wasn't just one. It was 4 or 5 of them.
Right.
In a traveling in a group.
Yeah, they don't. That's another thing. Most cults never allow anybody to be by themselves. They don't trust that. They have to be in a group. You have to be in a group when you travel. So, especially the women. So if you go,
they appeared to be waiting on someone coming off of a plane. I mean, they were gone by the time our person.
That's probably so. It was at the airport.
Mm-hmm.
Probably so.
Yeah,
probably so. But there also are Tibetans there, and they dress like that. The Dalai Lama. They dress like that, and we have every world religion here now in North Carolina. Buddhism, Islam. We got them all in North Carolina. So it could be any number of things. Sikhs. We have Sikhs in North Carolina. That's an Indian religion. We'll talk about the Sikhs. And they're the ones that wear the turbans that go straight up, kind of thing. We have all. Well, like I said, we got every world religion there is. We got just about in North Carolina, definitely in the United States. So.
I heard a sad statistic on Caleb this week. It said that with all the colleges getting ready to start back, that 7 out of 10 freshmen going from home to college that were church members, 7 out of 10 would not be church members once they went to college. They got a taste of all the other cults and auctions and everything that are out there.
And they get brainwashed.
7 out of 10.
Some professor gets in their head.
Yeah. Exactly.
But are some of these cults, do they look for a certain type of person?
Yes.
Like ones with low self-esteem?
Low self-esteem, the loner, the one who's not connected anywhere, the one who's troubled, and they'll watch them and see. They'll listen. They'll pay attention to them to see if they can pick up those kind of things. Ones that are having conflict with their parents or the spouse. That kind of thing. They see that you're drinking. A lot of times they go after people who are drinking or using drugs because they're vulnerable. They bring them in. Manson did that. He was an expert at picking up on people like that. When he had his cult, that was a cultic movement. The followers of Manson.
But you would think with these that were so educated, how did they get into it? How did they fall for it?
Well, if you're vulnerable and you're looking for the truth, and somebody's got in your head, you don't think the church has it, and this person convinces you they do, or your friends say, we found it, come be with us, and you'll finally be happy, and and they teach all these things, and so, it makes you wonder. Our best protection is understanding it, so that we can pick up on the signs when we see them, when it's around us, particularly protect our children, grandchildren, because they especially target younger people. And by the way, it used to be the primary audience for most of the cults were college-age people. That's not the case anymore because we live in a secular society, a pagan society, that they now go after older folks and they go after young folks. We're talking now about 10, 11, 12-year-olds. Okay? They'll have kids from their group invite them to a kids' party. They're not going to say anything in front of those kids that's heretical, but they'll convince that kid that this is the place of happiness, the place where you ought to be, and get kids start coming, and they've been able to do that. And we know from some of the cults, because as you know, when people have been rescued from them, the kind of therapy they have to go through to be resolved from it. It's called transformational therapy, because they get so brainwashed, so caught up. And you can read books written by psychologists who deal with these people and how long it takes and how it affects them. So, and they can be violent, or they can become suicidal, because remember that cult leader has told them, you're going to do this to them. You're going to take away their personhood, their selfhood, their right, their identity, and all these things. And so they're scared. It creates a kind of paranoia. Cult leaders, some cults also look for people who've been incarcerated. Vulnerable. They're vulnerable. And they'll draw them in. Why do they want that group? Because incarcerated people generally are more amenable to do anything they want them to do in order to belong. And even in prison, some of these cults have groups in the prisons to reach out to people. The military now has chaplains from almost every single, they have chaplains from the Wicca now, the witches movement, and they also have atheist chaplains and so forth. Don't know why, but they do. So, what about anything else about cults or about Mormonism that you're interested in knowing? Yeah, they started the town of Nauvoo, Illinois, and it grew to 20,000 in the 1840s. And it was in 1843 that he instituted polygamy. And it was outlawed in 1890 by the Mormon Church and 1893 by the United States government. By the way, you might actually know that there are people in court suing to have polygamy recognized as a legal institution in the United States. You can't define marriage anymore as a institution, peculiar institution of one man and a woman, right? Man and a woman. So if the Supreme Court says that people should be able to marry who they want to marry, they got a legitimate argument. It's going to be hard for the Court of Appeals, Supreme Court, to say no. Once you've opened that door. You can't be a little bit pregnant. Y'all know that, don't you? You open the door, and these kind of things can happen. So you got to be careful with it. How do you regulate? Well, I mean, it's difficult. So you've been watching what's going on in the news. We start wanting to take down all the Confederate monuments, and now they want to take down Washington and Jefferson and Madison. There's a group of students at James Madison High School in Wisconsin that are petitioning to have the school name changed because he owned slaves, and so forth. They want to take down the statue of Teddy Roosevelt in front of the New York Museum because he was a racist. So once you start that slippery slope, once you start that, it's a dangerous thing. So now they're coming up with the compromise. You heard what our governor said. We should put them in museums or at historical sites and get them off state property. Very, very interesting. And I saw a thing today where for all the good they did when they first started, they really drive me nuts. Now, the Southern Poverty Law Center has a graph when all the Confederate monuments went up. Well, a lot of them went up in the 1960s, 1965, 66. Well, that was the anniversary of the Civil War. That's when they went up. It had nothing to do with the Civil Rights Movement, but they say it's because of the Civil Rights Movement. No, it had a lot to do with the anniversary of the Civil War. And the 50th anniversary of the Civil War, which was, if you go back, 1920s. A lot of the monuments went up in the 1920s. 50th anniversary. So, but it's amazing how we can twist information. And that's what cults do. They twist things to suit themselves. And in an age in which people are not biblically literate, who don't understand things, and who are vulnerable to these things, it's easy for them to get into people's head. Right? So, any other questions about them? Any of you ever seen the Book of Mormon? Have you read the Book of Mormon?
I've seen the book. I haven't read the book.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. If you read it, you will find that he talks about God and Jesus in there. Jacob, remember people from the Bible. So he obviously knew the Bible very well. And that's not unusual. We call this eclecticism, that is borrowing stuff from a variety of sources and putting it together. By the way, Muhammad did the same thing. You will find the Old Testament and the New Testament in the Quran. You will also find teachings from Zoroastrianism. That was a Persian religion. You know, if you know what you're looking for, you can find all those things in the Quran. Okay. And when we get to that, we'll talk more about that. So, and right now they're spending a lot of money. In fact, they sent me just before I moved a new Quran, the CARE, which is the Council on American Islamic Relations, sent out to all clergy a new Quran, but it's understanding the Quran. It has teachings in there to help you understand. So,
I was in one hotel recently that didn't have anywhere, didn't appear. Now, it could have been somewhere I didn't look in all the drawers.
Right.
But there was no drawer beside the bed with
Yeah.
the Bible, getting
Right.
the Bible in it. But there was one hotel, and it had
Book of Mormon?
No, it had Book of Mormon.
Was it a Marriott?
No, I don't. Well, no, I don't.
Well, they own several hotels. Marriott's just one of them.
It may have been. Do they own Gaylord?
They may. The ones they own have the Book of Mormon in them.
Yeah.
If they own it, the Book of Mormon's in it.
Yeah, it was off.
Because I stayed in the Marriott in Greenville and the Book of Mormon in
And
it.
I think it's owned by the Marriott.
Yeah.
So do they remove the Bible?
No,
Or
the
do
Bible.
they leave those?
Most of them, they left the Bible in there and added the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. To get,
I hadn't seen one where they removed the Bible. But I have seen them where they've added the Book of Mormon.
Yeah,
So-
I had never seen a Book of Mormon
Right.
before in a hotel room.
And the reason the Gideons continue to use the King James Version, in case you don't know this, it's in public domain, which means you don't have to pay any copyright fees to print it. It's the only Bible in public domain. So that's why they stay with the King James, which is interesting. But and they still put Bibles in lots and lots of places. Yeah. Okay, we want to have. Let me get a pad here. We want to have time of prayer. As I said, I spoke to Judy Caldwell today. She is getting chemo every 3 weeks, intensive chemo every 3 weeks. Don Bell